Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When strangers in matching polos arrive at his remote seaside cottage demanding the keys for community use, one man finds himself in a surreal battle against a rogue HOA determined to claim what isn't theirs. They think he'll fold. What they don't know, he's ready for war. I've never been a man who likes unannounced guests, and I especially don't like them when they come holding clipboards and artificial smiles. That morning, the wind off the Atlantic had been perfect, sharp enough to make the pine trees chatter, soft enough to ruffle my coffee without blowing it cold. I was sitting on the weathered porch of my grandfather's old cottage, watching a freighter slice the horizon in half, when I noticed the sedan pulling up the gravel road like it owned the place. 3 people stepped out, all wearing matching navy polos embroidered with the words Seabridge Dunes Community Council. They looked absurd against the rugged backdrop of my oceanfront land, like a pack of mall cops who'd taken a wrong turn into the wilderness. I stood slowly, set my mug on the rail, and stepped down to meet them halfway. The woman in the middle extended her hand like I was legally required to shake it. "Good morning. You must be Mr. Roland Depends," I said. "You selling something?" The woman laughed a little too brightly. "Oh no, not at all. My name's Karen Dallas, acting president of the Seabridge Dunes HOA. These are my colleagues, Todd and Angela." I gave them a nod but didn't offer more. Karen didn't wait for an invitation before launching into her pitch. "We've noticed that you visit this home frequently, which is wonderful. We really admire how you've maintained the property. It's practically a local landmark. However, given the ongoing renovations to our community clubhouse and some unexpected delays with temporary housing for out-of-town board members, we'd like to make you a proposal." I raised an eyebrow. "A proposal?" "Yes," she said, with that customer service tone that made my skin itch. "We were hoping you'd be willing to provide a spare set of keys to the cottage for just a few days. In return, you'd have honorary access to all Seabridge Dunes amenities, the gym, the pool, the social events. It's a win-win." I stared at her for a few seconds, waiting for the punchline. When it didn't come, I said, "You do realize this house isn't part of your HOA?" Karen's smile didn't waver. "Well, technically, it borders our development, and the historic parcel lines are a bit blurry. We view this house as a sort of transitional asset. Your grandfather's property predates Seabridge Dunes, of course, but you do use community access roads. And many of our homeowners see this area as part of the larger shared environment." "That's a lot of words to say something very stupid," I said calmly. "Let me save us all some time. This is private property. My grandfather bought it in 1964. It's not under your jurisdiction. No one besides me has any right to set foot on it, much less stay in it. There's no scenario, present or future, where I'm giving you keys." Karen's smile tightened around the edges. She adjusted her posture slightly, the way people do before they pivot from sugar to steel. "I understand this may seem sudden," she said, her voice flattening, "but we are trying to act in the best interest of the community. Our board is in a crisis with guest housing, and we expect neighbors to support neighbors. If you refuse to cooperate, we may have to explore other avenues." I pulled out my phone and tapped the voice recorder widget. "Could you repeat that last part?" Karen blinked, and I watched her recalibrate in real time. "I meant we'll have to look into whether your continued exclusive use of this property aligns with local zoning standards," she said, more carefully this time, "especially in a designated coastal cooperation zone like this one." I nearly laughed. "There's no such designation for this land. You should check the county records before you start inventing legal phrases. Also, just so you know, everything you've said is being recorded, and I have cameras running 24/7. If I see one uninvited person step foot on this property again, I will call the sheriff. I won't warn you twice." Todd shifted uncomfortably. Angela avoided eye contact. Karen's mouth twitched into something like a smile, but the warmth was gone. "Well," she said stiffly, "we had hoped for a more collaborative conversation, but I suppose that's your choice." "It is," I said, taking a deliberate step forward, "and you've made yours. Now, get off my land." They left in silence, tires crunching against gravel, the scent of forced civility lingering like spoiled perfume. I watched their car disappear up the hill, then opened the app on my phone and checked the perimeter cameras. Every angle was clear. The wind picked up again, snapping the old fishing flag against the mast by the porch. I stared at the horizon for a moment longer, then picked up my coffee. It was cold, Figures. I'd barely been gone a full day when my phone buzzed with a notification from the security system. It was mid-morning in Charlotte, and I was sitting in a bland conference room watching a logistics coordinator butcher the pronunciation of Barents Sea during a vendor presentation. I glanced down, expecting a wind trigger or maybe a raccoon, nothing unusual for a cliffside property, but what I saw made my blood run cold. Motion detected. Rear entrance. 9:42 a.m. Visual alert. Unknown individuals detected. I muted the meeting, opened the camera feed, and zoomed in. There they were. Two men, mid-40s maybe, dressed in identical polo shirts with the Seabridge Dunes HOA emblem stitched on the left chest. They were walking casually through my side gate as if they'd done it 100 times. No hesitation, no knocking. Just a little flick of the latch. They must have known it wasn't locked, which told me they'd scouted it before. I tapped to switch angles as they rounded the back deck. One of them carried a clipboard. The other had something that looked suspiciously like a leather tool roll. My heart pounded harder when he crouched by the rear deadbolt and began unfurling what was unmistakably a set of lockpicks. My finger stabbed the intercom button in the app. "Step away from the door. You are being recorded. This is private property. I have already called the police." Both men froze. The one with the clipboard looked straight at the camera with wide eyes. The other dropped the pick set like it had burned his fingers. They bolted, no hesitation, vaulting the deck steps and scrambling back down the side yard like they'd just kicked open a beehive. The camera caught everything, including the plate numbers on the HOA-marked SUV parked in the brush at the edge of my driveway. I didn't bother calling the cops. I already had. As soon as I saw that pick set, I hit the one-touch dial for the local sheriff's office. I was patched through to a deputy within minutes and gave them the full rundown. I also emailed the footage directly to the department from my cloud account and texted a copy to my attorney, who was more than happy to interrupt her own vacation to schedule an emergency consultation. Back in the meeting, I politely excused myself with the words, "I need to deal with an attempted break-in at my coastal property," and left behind a room full of confused stares. By the time I got to my hotel, the deputy had already called back. They ran the plates. The SUV was registered to the Seabridge Dunes Community Vehicle Pool. One of the individuals, Roger Livingston, was an active member of the HOA's Facilities Subcommittee. The other, unknown at the time, turned out to be his cousin, an off-duty locksmith from upstate. They hadn't even bothered to hide it. I spent the next hour packaging all the footage into neat little labeled folders. I annotated timestamps, wrote a short incident summary, and added screenshots of the men's faces from 3 angles. Then I sent the whole file to a trusted local journalist I knew from my days working on nautical zoning policy maps, someone with a mean streak for HOA overreach. That evening, just as I was about to dig into a disappointing room service meal, I got a text from my neighbor, Glenn. "Glenn, hey bud. That Karen woman was back at the seawall earlier. She was pointing at your house again with some guy in a blazer. They didn't see me." I asked him to describe the man. Glenn, bald, tan, smug, had a binder, looked like a real estate agent. I sat back and stared at my phone. They weren't just trying to borrow the house anymore. They were scouting it, marketing it, as if they had the right. I responded simply, "Me, keep your phone charged. You might be called as a witness." Then I opened the surveillance app again and queued up the day's footage one more time, studying every frame, every face. Every inch of my home caught on camera while I wasn't there. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was preparation. The letter arrived the next morning, sitting smugly in my mailbox like it belonged there. Thick envelope, embossed logo, high-quality paper, the kind of stationery that screams, "We think this makes it official." The return address read Seabridge Dunes Administrative Council. Inside was a folded document marked URGENTNOTICEOFACCESS. Rights, complete with faux legal language and a bulleted list of community emergency use provisions. I scanned it once, then read it again more slowly, not because I didn't understand it, but because I couldn't believe how bold the lies were. According to this so-called document, my cottage was now classified as a contingent auxiliary asset based on a neighborhood ordinance from 1983, which allegedly granted the HOA temporary access to non-member structures in the event of extended communal disruption. It would have been funny if it weren't so insane. The document cited a shared zoning overlay addendum, a term that doesn't exist in any South Carolina coastal land policy. They even included a grainy photocopied map with my property outlined in yellow marker, as if that alone gave it legal weight. And then came the cherry on top, a deadline. If I did not provide access within 72 hours, they would escalate the matter through community arbitration channels. Community arbitration for property they don't even own. I picked up the phone and called the county recorder's office. After half an hour of bouncing between departments, I got a zoning official who confirmed what I already knew. There was no such ordinance, no such overlay, and no jurisdictional ambiguity. My property was clearly, unquestionably outside any HOA borders. Always had been, always would be. But I wasn't satisfied with a phone call. I wanted paperwork. So I hired a licensed land surveyor. An old-timer named Hal who smelled like motor oil and had a file folder for every legal boundary dispute in the region since the Reagan era. We walked the full perimeter of my lot while he mumbled to himself, occasionally stopping to point out stone markers and buried iron rods that hadn't moved in half a century. When he finished, he gave me a signed statement and a stamped copy of the official plat map that showed, in no uncertain terms, my land was autonomous. Not near HOA jurisdiction, not ambiguously within HOA jurisdiction, entirely outside it. Hal looked over the fake map the HOA had sent and grunted. "This isn't a survey," he said. "This is something someone's nephew made in Microsoft Paint. I've seen more convincing diagrams on refrigerator magnets." That same afternoon, I drafted a formal cease and desist notice and had it overnighted to the Seabridge Dunes HOA office. I attached Hal's stamped report, the official county plat, and a polite little postscript. Your next attempt to fabricate territorial claims over this property will be addressed in court. I wasn't bluffing. I'd already spoken with my attorney, and she was salivating. This isn't just encroachment, she'd said. This is orchestrated fraud. They're trying to rewrite your deed with a laser printer and a straight face. While all this was happening, Glenn, my neighbor, and now semi-official lookout, kept sending me updates. He saw Karen walking up and down the street with a clipboard, talking to neighbors, gesturing toward my house. One afternoon, she hosted what looked like a casual gathering on her porch, complete with folding chairs and a whiteboard labeled Temporary Guest Housing Strategy. Glenn said she mentioned my name more than once. I didn't doubt it. Karen had already pulled this scam before. I'd done my own digging by now. She'd quietly moved her niece into a vacant house on Windward Lane last month while the owner was out of town. Claimed it was communal usage during construction displacement. The HOA backed her until the owner came back early and threatened to sue. The niece vanished the next morning and everyone pretended it never happened. That little stunt had worked. Barely. Now she was doubling down and I was the next name on her list. I wasn't just up against petty harassment anymore. This wasn't a misunderstanding or HOA overreach. This was a coordinated effort to fabricate authority and seize temporary control of private homes under the guise of community necessity, and I had the receipts to prove it. I spent that evening scanning every document, building a master file, backing everything up to both the cloud and a fireproof external drive. If they were going to escalate, I would be 10 steps ahead. And I had a feeling escalation was exactly what they had in mind. It started with a flickering bulb. Then came the silence. I had returned to the cottage late on a Friday afternoon, ready to decompress and dig into some overdue nautical mapping for a private client. The sun was dropping low behind the bluff, painting the water in streaks of gold, and everything felt almost normal until I flipped the main light switch and got nothing. Not a spark. Not even a buzz. I checked the panel. Everything was in order. No tripped breakers, no melted fuses. The appliances were dead. The Wi-Fi router, usually humming with data, sat cold and dark. I pulled out my phone, hoping to reconnect to the home network. No signal. That's when I walked around the side of the house and noticed the empty socket where the electric meter used to be. It had been removed, clean, clinical, like someone had done it with a practiced hand. The metal enclosure that housed it was still bolted to the wall, but the meter itself, the round glass-faced gauge that tracked my power usage, was simply gone, like it had never existed. For a moment, I stood there frozen, taking in the sheer boldness of it. Then I snapped into motion. I called Duke Energy's emergency line and got patched to a night dispatcher. After giving my address, there was a pause. Then she said, "Oh, yes." We show that meter was deactivated and pulled for non-payment 3 days ago. My voice dropped. That's not possible. I'm on autopay. Has been for years. Another pause. Well, she said slowly, it shows a termination request was submitted online, signed by, one moment, E. Rowland, acting through authorized HOA representative. I blinked. There is no authorized HOA. I don't belong to one, and I never submitted that request. I demanded full records, the termination form, the IP log, any authorizing names. She said I'd need to submit a fraud dispute, and I did, immediately. Within the hour, I received a scanned copy of the fake termination order. It had my name typed at the bottom, but the signature looked like a child tracing cursive off a cereal box. The contact phone number was a local line I didn't recognize. And in the field marked Reason for Termination, it read, Temporary disuse. Property offered for community use during clubhouse renovation. I stood in the dark kitchen with only my phone flashlight and the rising heat of rage to keep me company. They weren't just testing boundaries anymore. They were sabotaging infrastructure. The technician from Duke arrived early the next morning, visibly irritated. Normally, we don't do emergency reactivations on weekends, he said, but your request got bumped up the chain. Some kind of investigation underway. He confirmed the meter had been removed with the proper master key, which narrowed the list of suspects to company employees or someone who'd posed as one convincingly. By the way, he added, pulling a clipboard from his truck, we got a second request last night to cancel this visit. Claimed it was resolved. Came from a different number. But the rep who called it in said she was acting on behalf of the community liaison. You wouldn't happen to know a Karen D something? I didn't answer. I just stared at him for a long second until he got the message. Once power was restored and the Wi-Fi flicked back to life, I scoured every frame of security footage for the last 72 hours. I found nothing. Whoever did it had known the blind spot between the garage and the fence line. My guess, someone parked on the back service road, jumped the drainage ditch, and walked in under the cover of early morning fog. I saved every frame of motion detection anyway. I also made 3 more changes that day. 1. I installed an additional camera with a 180-degree fisheye lens covering the blind spot. 2. I hired a private locksmith to rekey every lock with high security cores and install a deadbolt that required a programmable key fob only I possessed. 3. I made an appointment with a property crimes detective at the county sheriff's department. The woman I met with on Monday wore a badge and a 1,000-yard stare. I gave her everything. The forged documents, the meter removal, the camera footage, the footage of the 2 men trying to pick my locks, and even screenshots of the HOA emergency housing plan from Glenn's covert photos. She flipped through the pages slowly. This is organized, she said. This isn't just harassment. This is calculated, coordinated, and it smells like a whole pot of bad decisions. I asked her if it was enough to file charges. Maybe, she said. It's close. But if you catch one of them in the act with tools, documents, or making the approach, we won't need a maybe. I nodded. I was already working on it. The next few days passed like the quiet before a hurricane, too calm, too still, and humming with unspoken tension. I didn't leave the property. I worked remotely from the cottage, rotated between the cameras like a prison warden, and kept every door locked even when I was inside. I updated my lawyer daily and reviewed every new entry from the county fraud investigation. They had flagged the meter removal as part of a multi-case review, which was bureaucrat speak for we think this is bigger than it looks, but we're not ready to say so yet. I wasn't surprised, because on Thursday, just before sunset, something finally moved again. It started with a notification from my motion sensor, the one I had hidden behind a false birdhouse near the northeast fence line. I checked the live feed and caught a clear view of a man standing on the other side of my property line, talking into a phone while slowly walking the fence. Not on my land, but right on the edge of it. He was taking photos, zooming in on my security cameras, my porch, my windows. I watched him for 10 minutes. He never stepped over the boundary. Then he walked off down the access road, disappearing into the dusk. The next day, 2 more things happened. First, my mailbox flag was up, but I hadn't mailed anything. Inside was a folded flyer with no return address. It read, Reclaiming Shared Space, a neighborhood solution for unused property. Below that was a graphic of 3 houses, one of them slightly faded out, marked non-participating parcel. And under that, don't let one person keep our community divided. I stared at it for a long time before tossing it into the shredder. Second, my phone rang. It was Glenn. "Yeah, don't freak out," he said immediately, which of course made me brace for impact. "But I just saw someone in a Seabridge truck try your back gate again. I was out walking the dog. Same guy as before. I think one of the ones from the break-in. He had something in his hand. A folder, maybe? He rattled the gate, then backed off when he saw my flashlight. You get a picture?" Not this time. He bolted fast. I thanked him and hung up. Then I sat down and reviewed every frame from every angle. Nothing. That section of fence was just beyond the reach of the older driveway cam. He'd known exactly where to stop. Again. I ordered a new wide-angle camera that night, same-day delivery. But it didn't stop there. By Saturday morning, I'd started to notice something strange. My motion alerts were showing activity in the exact same spot each time, the side path between the garage and the utility shed. But every time I checked the footage, there was nothing. No person, no animal, no movement. At first, I assumed it was a glitch, until I found the cause. Hidden behind the corner of the shed, tucked under the rose bushes, was a trail camera. Camo casing, zip-tied to a low-hanging branch. Not mine. The kind used by deer hunters to monitor movement. Completely passive, motion-triggered, no wireless transmission. It had been there for at least a week. Whoever placed it had physically returned at some point to collect the SD card. Maybe more than once. I put on gloves, removed it, and bagged it for evidence. Then I took a broom and swept the dirt in a wide circle around the shed and rear fence. Next time they came to retrieve it, I'd have footprints. And this time, I was adding a hidden thermal cam on the high branch just above. They wanted intel? So did I. By now, it was clear that this wasn't just harassment. This was surveillance. They were treating my home like a target, so I treated it like a perimeter. I walked the full boundary line that afternoon, checking for disturbed earth, marks in the grass, broken twigs. I found a cigarette butt near the eastern fence post, and beside it, a used latex glove. Someone had stood there, recently. I bagged both and added them to the growing box of evidence. That evening, I drafted a letter to my lawyer, titled simply, Ongoing Patterns of Premeditated Trespass and Surveillance, Week 1 Summary. Then I locked the doors, armed the system, and waited. They were getting bolder. I was getting ready. The knock came at 6:15 in the morning. Not the casual kind of knock you give a neighbor when you want to borrow sugar. This was firm, deliberate, the kind of knock that expects compliance. I was already awake, sipping coffee in the kitchen while reviewing thermal cam footage from the previous night. I'd caught a brief heat signature near the eastern fence line just after 3 a.m., but it had vanished too fast to identify. Probably another recon trip. I had just started tagging the clip when the knock came. I opened the door slowly, phone already recording in my left hand. On the porch stood a man in a gray suit, early 50s, flanked by a younger woman in business casual. He introduced himself as Nathan Crowley, an independent arbitrator contracted by the Seabridge Dunes Community Affairs Board. The woman beside him was introduced only as Ms. Baker, no first name. Crowley handed me a manila envelope with a firm but friendly expression, like he was doing me a favor. "This is your formal notice of arbitration," he said. "The HOA has filed a request for binding mediation under Community Code Section 6, Paragraph D. You're being offered one last opportunity to comply voluntarily and grant temporary access to the property before we initiate further remedies." I looked down at the envelope. Further remedies sounded suspiciously like a euphemism for we're going to break in again. I took the envelope without opening it. "You're not officers of the court," I said flatly. Crowley nodded. "No, sir, but the HOA has authorized us to act in a representative capacity for matters involving neighborhood unity and emergency housing logistics. This arbitration is recognized under Seabridge Dunes bylaws and compliant with the South Carolina Neighborhood Mediation Act." I stared at him for a moment. "This property isn't under your HOA. Your bylaws are meaningless here. According to recent cartographic overlays submitted by the HOA's Geographic Review Board, your parcel has been flagged for inclusion in the next perimeter expansion vote. It's within the development buffer zone." I couldn't help it. I actually laughed. There is no development buffer zone. And no, you can't vote to annex private land. Crowley's smile twitched. "Ms. Baker opened a small notepad and began writing something down. "Is that a threat of legal resistance?" she asked without looking up. "No," I said calmly. "That's a statement of fact. This land is deeded, surveyed, and protected." Any attempt to enforce HOA policy here is trespassing and fraud, and I'm done explaining that to people who show up at my door like missionaries with clipboards. Crowley raised his hand slightly as if to signal peace. We understand your position, but as a show of good faith, we're asking you to attend a community mediation forum this Saturday at 10 a.m. You're free to decline, of course, but non-participation may be interpreted as hostile intent under HOA review. Good, I said. Then let them interpret it however they want. Now get off my property. They didn't argue, just nodded, turned, and walked briskly back to the SUV waiting at the base of the drive. I shut the door, locked it, and slid the envelope onto the counter. It was probably full of fake documents, unofficial seals, and misquoted statutes, but I had other plans. I forwarded the names Nathan Crowley and Ms. Baker to my lawyer. She called back within an hour, already digging. Crowley had no legal license in the state of South Carolina, no arbitration credentials, no public record of any court-recognized dispute resolution work. Ms. Baker appeared on the HOA's internal vendor list as a communications consultant, but nothing else. The so-called arbitration notice was a bluff, a well-dressed, carefully phrased performance designed to make me panic and fold. But I wasn't folding. Instead, I made an appointment with the county registrar's office. I wanted to place a restrictive covenant on my deed, something that would prohibit any future owner from voluntarily joining any HOA without dissolving the agreement in court, just in case, just to ensure that when I eventually passed this property on, no one could ever say it wasn't defended to the last clause. That weekend, while Seabridge held their ridiculous community mediation forum without me, I sent certified copies of every incident. The trespass, the fake documents, the surveillance camera, the forged utility request to the state attorney general's office, and then I called a private investigator. If they wanted to keep pretending they had legal standing, I was going to bury them in real legal fire, and I wasn't done yet. The calm didn't last 48 hours. Monday morning, I woke up to find my driveway partially blocked. A rusted trailer had been left parked at the foot of the hill, half on the road, half jutting over onto my gravel incline, loaded with folded chairs, storage bins, and what looked like a tarp-covered stack of mattresses. It had no plates. I walked down with a coffee in one hand and my phone in the other, already recording. No one in sight, just the ocean breeze and the dull sound of waves. But this wasn't abandoned junk. It was staged. There was a handwritten sign taped to one of the bins that read, "Emergency Housing Supplies, HOA Coordinated." No logo, no contact info, just that. By noon, 3 different cars had driven up, slowed at the trailer, then circled the block again like vultures sniffing a carcass. I watched from my window, arms crossed, phone ready, heart rate ticking up with every slow roll past my property. I filed an illegal dumping report with the county, had the trailer towed by a private contractor within 2 hours, and kept the footage. But the message was clear. They weren't stopping. They were building a story, one slow prop at a time, hoping I'd eventually snap or slip. But what they didn't know was that I'd already set the trap. That afternoon, the private investigator I hired, a wiry, blunt man named Ruben, sent me his first findings. He'd traced Karen's niece, the same one who had temporarily relocated into that vacant house down the street, to 2 other properties over the past year, both under similar pretenses. In both cases, the homes belonged to elderly seasonal owners who were rarely around. In one instance, the niece had moved in for over a month before being discovered. The HOA claimed it was a clerical miscommunication, but Ruben found something better, a document signed by Karen herself authorizing the move with a forged digital lease agreement. The owner never gave permission. The HOA quietly paid them a settlement afterward to avoid legal fallout. I sent that evidence straight to my lawyer. She nearly cackled. It was the exact pattern they were trying to use on me, only this time they were meeting resistance and documentation. By Wednesday, the situation reached a breaking point. I caught another individual approaching my garage door, this time at midday, bold as brass, clipboard in hand. He was wearing a high-vis vest marked HOA Facilities Review and carried what looked like an inspection checklist. I confronted him before he got to the second step. "Name," I demanded, phone already filming. He looked startled but composed himself. "Greg Milburn. I'm here to conduct a facilities suitability review under the emergency protocol provisions." "Suitability for what exactly?" "For temporary occupancy approval. You were notified by the arbitration committee." "Get off my property." He held out the clipboard like it was going to hypnotize me. "Sir, I just need to make a few notes. Off my property." He hesitated. I stepped forward. That's when Ruben, who'd been watching from a parked car up the road, appeared from behind a nearby tree and walked up fast with his badge and phone raised. "I've got the full approach on video." "You're trespassing," Ruben said flatly. Milburn paled. Without another word, he turned and walked briskly down the drive, didn't even look back. Ruben followed him to his car, another unmarked Seabridge Dunes utility vehicle, and filmed him pulling away. Plates recorded, video logged. That night, Ruben handed me everything: clips, license checks, and a folder with what he called the smoking gun. Inside were internal HOA emails. They weren't obtained legally. Ruben was smart enough not to hack anything, but they had been anonymously forwarded to him from someone inside the HOA who had had enough. No name, just a burner email. The emails included one from Karen, sent 2 weeks prior, with a subject line, "Upcoming requisition targets." My address was listed second. She had written, "If we keep the pressure on, he'll fold. He's a tech guy, not a fighter. Start prepping the trailer and make sure we get a false repair notice in place. That gives us access under 8D until he officially files." There was also a draft letter, never sent, accusing me of environmental violations for abandoning debris along the ocean line, and another one proposing the HOA install a temporary lockbox on my gate for emergency responders. My lawyer called the next morning. "We're done playing defense," she said. "This is conspiracy, plain and simple. I'm filing for a restraining order, a civil suit, and referring all of this to the county prosecutor. We're taking this to court." And just like that, the game changed. They wanted to push until I cracked. Instead, I went nuclear. The courthouse smelled like disinfectant and old paper, a mix I'd come to associate with bureaucracy and buried land disputes. But this wasn't some minor claim about a misdrawn fence or overgrown hedges. This was about my right to exist on my own land without being harassed, monitored, or forcefully annexed into a fictional authority. We filed the lawsuit on a Monday. By Thursday, it was all over the local news. Seabridge Dunes HOA accused of forgery, trespassing, and conspiracy. The headlines did most of the work. The evidence did the rest. My lawyer, Caroline, filed a civil suit naming the HOA as a corporate entity and 5 individuals directly, including Karen Dallas, Greg Milburn, and the so-called arbitrator Nathan Crowley. The charges included trespassing, fraudulent misrepresentation, attempted unlawful entry, and defamation of ownership rights. That was the civil side. But the criminal side, that moved faster than expected. The county prosecutor had already been reviewing my complaints, and Ruben's package of evidence turned the whole case radioactive. They opened a criminal investigation into Karen personally, then executed a search warrant on the HOA's office, tucked behind the community rec center like a termite queen's nest. They found everything: stacks of unfiled fake notices, pre-filled access request forms with blank signatures, several copies of sample access agreements that bore my name and others, a folder labeled 2025 housing targets with a spreadsheet of addresses, notes about owner occupancy patterns, and color-coded threat levels. My house was red. They also found a drawer full of lock-picking tools and a thumb drive labeled Karen Backup Docs. That thumb drive would go on to provide over 100 emails, including ones with chilling lines like, "If we control the optics, the legal part is easy. People don't fight back when they think they're isolated." That quote ended up in the arrest warrant. Karen was arrested in her driveway at 6:40 in the morning. Ruben texted me a photo from across the street. Karen in her pink bathrobe yelling at 2 deputies while being loaded into a cruiser. Her voice might have still sounded confident, but her slippers said otherwise. 2 other HOA board members resigned the same day. Cruelly, the fake arbitrator was tracked to a shady consulting firm that had its business license suspended by the end of the week. Within 10 days, Seabridge Dunes HOA was placed under forced administrative review by the county. The judge froze their accounts and suspended all enforcement authority. A special hearing was scheduled for emergency disbandment. When I walked into the courtroom that day, Karen wasn't there. Her lawyer stood in her place stuttering about misinterpretations and informal practices, but the evidence was overwhelming. The judge didn't need an hour. Seabridge Dunes HOA was dissolved that afternoon by court order, its charter revoked, its officers barred from forming any new association without express review and approval. Karen was charged with 6 criminal counts, including forgery, conspiracy, and unlawful surveillance. She later took a plea deal for 5 years in state prison and full financial restitution to all targeted homeowners. But it didn't end there. At my lawyer's request, we filed a property motion with the county to have my parcel legally declared as a non-annexable private easement zone, meaning no HOA, present or future, could attempt jurisdiction without my notarized consent. It was approved. A week later, I installed a 6-foot steel sign on my gate. Private property not subject to HOA-controlled trespassers will be documented and prosecuted. I haven't had a single visitor since. The cameras still run 24 hours a day, but lately they've only picked up deer, the occasional raccoon, and the breeze off the ocean. And that's how I like it.